All right. Well, my topic tonight is just going to be looking at the Son of Man, King Jesus, in Daniel 7:13 and 14. Just these two verses, of course. We'll skip around and look at some others as well, and some New Testament passages. I I want to be honest from the get go. Much of the information that I'm going to be sharing in this presentation comes from a book that I've read it before, and I just recently started reading it again. And it's titled "The Son of Man: The Gospel in Daniel 7, Volume 1." He has a volume 2 that looks at some of the writings of Paul as well. Just an excellent work. Every now and then I run across a book like this that it's just very expository in its teaching, and of course I like that. I have nothing to say to you that I want to say what the Bible says. I want to exegete the scriptures, and so this is kind of what this book does. It goes really in depth at looking at Daniel 7 and how Jesus used this title, the Son of Man, and applied it to himself, of course, and how he often used it, um, quoting other passages or other parts of Daniel. So just a really good resource. I can't recommend it enough. Of course, Walter Kaiser Jr. says I can hardly find the adequate words to commend this book. And as I just said, I agree. If you're an expository teacher, preacher, you will find this book extremely helpful. Well, um, I would put it right up there with Dr. Tony Costa's book on early creeds and hymns. I can't recommend that book enough as well. It's a great resource. But as I went through this, I couldn't help but think of another book that I've been reading, and this is titled Jesus, Man, Messenger, Messiah by Abu Zachariah. And of course, Abu Zachariah, he's a Muslim, and he would have us to believe that the deity of Christ is not a biblical doctrine, or at least it's not found in the Old Testament or the New Testament, really, I think is what he says. But on page 31, he says, the reason why Jewish people do not believe in a triune God is that he is never presented as such in the Old Testament. And of course, I want to ask, what Old Testament are you reading? Because it's absolutely filled with passages confirming the deity of Christ, both the Old and the New Testament. And we recognize that Muslims have a very shallow understanding of the Old Testament. They love to pick out, one Bible verse and focus on that. They totally disregard the context and often misunderstand the passages and what it's saying entirely. But we're going to look at the book of Daniel here, just a small portion of it tonight, and just want to show you how Jesus takes this title, the Son of Man, applies it to himself, and he's quoting Daniel 7. This is something that we need to know. This is something that we need to uh, understand and be prepared to answer these Muslims who are making these claims like Abu Zachariah. He goes on to say that Jesus preached pure monotheism, and of course he's talking about a Unitarian type God. He's talking about God as a monad, or as one in being, one in person. So here we are. Islam says that Jesus is no more than a prophet, and Christians say that he is the God man. That's the difference between the two of us. And as we look at this passage tonight, we need to understand that this is one of the most fundamental disagreements between the two religions. I know that you realize that, but just felt like I needed to make that comment at the beginning. So, who has the real Jesus? This idea is being discussed in Matthew 16, which contains what I would say is one of the oddest statements in the New Testament. Here, Jesus asks the question, Who do people say the Son of Man is? Eventually, in verse 15, he asks his disciples, but who do you say that I am? And Peter responds by saying, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So I want you to notice here that we have 3 different titles for Jesus in this one chapter already. But notice that Jesus says to Peter, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. The disciples, of course, here are struggling to understand the person and work of Christ. Just a few verses later, Jesus explains the gospel to them in verse 21. He explains his coming death, burial, and resurrection. And you know how Peter responds. This is a well-known passage. I'm sure that you're familiar with it. Peter says, God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you. And I know you're fully aware of how Jesus responds too. He says, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's. So you can see here that he's struggling to understand. I mean, he's heard what Jesus has said. He's heard him predict his death, burial, and resurrection, but he says, God forbid. And of course, Jesus corrects him very strongly here. And if we back up to verse 20, Jesus already knew that the disciples were not quite ready to share the gospel with others. I think this is why he warned them that they should tell no one that he was the Christ. Very strong language here again. He warned them. Some people think that Jesus is trying to prolong his life here until the timing is right. He's trying to hide his identity. I don't think that's the case at all. I think he's very outspoken and very clear about who he is. He's the Son of Man. I think the reason he says this to his disciples is that it has more to do with their understanding of the gospel, and of course, waiting on the Holy Spirit. If we look at Mark chapter 9, 31 through 32, we find much of the same thing. Jesus predicts his death, burial, and resurrection. He says, the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. Verse 32. Here the disciples, we're told, did not understand his statement, and they were afraid to ask him. Again, same thing in Luke 18, 31 through 34. Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, just like these other 2 passages. He says that he's going to die, be buried, and on the 3rd day arise from the dead. And again, the disciples, we're told, understood none of these things. So I don't think it has anything to do with him trying to prolong his life, or he's waiting for the timing, to go to the cross. I think it has more to do with their understanding of the gospel. He didn't want to create this atmosphere of confusion. And again, they needed the Holy Spirit before they started sharing the gospel. So it kind of sounds odd to us for Jesus to say, go and tell no one. But that's kind of the way I see it there. And I would welcome any correction or input. If somebody else has a better idea, please share it with me, or maybe make a comment during the Q&A. But the point is, Jesus explicitly refers to himself here as the Son of Man in all 3 passages. This was his favorite title for himself. This was the most common title for Jesus in the New Testament. 49 times the Gospels refer to Jesus as the Christ or the Messiah, and only 11 of these times does Jesus refer to himself in this way. 25 times in the Gospels, he's called the Son of God, but only 5 of those times does Jesus describe himself in this way. 14 times the Gospels refer to him as the Son of David, but here only once does Jesus use this title for himself. But if we look at the Son of Man, we find that this phrase is used 78 times in the Gospels, and all 78 times it's used by Jesus. No one else dared use this title for him, but yet he refers to himself in this way. This was his favorite title. This was his favorite way of referring to himself. And over the years, some people have come to believe that the Son of Man is a reference to his humanity, but that's not true. This title speaks of his deity, his divine nature, his divine authority, and I think he expects his audience to make this connection to Daniel 7, and I think that they do. If we look at Daniel 7:13, I can read this, and you're going to think of several New Testament passages. Daniel 7:13 says, I saw in the night visions, and this is Daniel speaking, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. Verse 14, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom that all the nations and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Of course, there's a lot to unpack here, but let me begin by saying that on the surface, the title, the Son of Man, may not sound like a divine title, but it is. And the Old Testament is filled with references to the Son of Man. Of course, let me back up. Let me try to say it a little different here, because it is kind of a tricky thing. The Old Testament is filled with passages that use this title, the Son of Man, to speak of a normal human being. It really could be translated as the son of Adam in a lot of these passages, and of course here it does speak of humanity, and again a normal human being. Numbers 23:18, Psalms 8:4 are just a few examples, but it's clearly understood as a divine title in the New Testament. You see this over and over. The disciples and the others, they may not have fully understand the gospel, but no one ever asked Jesus to explain what he means by the Son of Man. They seem to understand that it's a reference to Daniel 7, which again is a reference to a divine figure. In fact, 3 of the 4 times that Jesus is accused of blasphemy is directly connected to this title. Matthew 26, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of God? And Jesus responds in verse 64 saying, you have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest doesn't ask a clarifying question here. He immediately tore his robes and accused him of blasphemy. We could look at Acts 7:56 through 57. Here we find the first Christian martyr. Here Stephen is killed for claiming Jesus is the Son of Man. So again, my point is that everyone seems to understand that this is a divine title, specifically referring to Daniel 7. And so what I want to do in the time that I have remaining is show you why they understood the Son of Man as a claim to deity. When Jesus takes this title for himself, he's claiming to be the God-man, basically. He's claiming to be this divine figure from Daniel 7. The book of Daniel often leads us to think about end times, but we shouldn't miss its high Christology. And it's really interesting to me, as I studied this, that Daniel 2:4 through Daniel 7:28 is recorded in Aramaic instead of Hebrew. They are, of course, similar languages, but this means that Daniel 7:13 contains the only reference to the Son of Man in Aramaic. So this is a unique passage here in Daniel 7:13. This is the only place in the Bible that we have the title, the phrase, whatever you want to call it, the words "the Son of Man" in English. This is the only place that we find them in Aramaic. So it's a very unique passage. And if we compare the two languages in Hebrew, again, I've already told you that it meant the son of Adam, Ben Adam, or the son of Adam. This is what we find again throughout the Old Testament. We find it in Numbers 23, Psalms 8, as well as others. But in the Aramaic, here in Daniel 7:13, it's translated in Aramaic, which is Bar Inasha, which seems to be understood differently in the New Testament. Perhaps we know that Jesus spoke Aramaic. So this is, I really believe this is the title that he's using. He's saying Bar Inasha. He's not just saying that he's a mere human being. And we can see this difference in the book of Daniel. In 7:13, it refers to a divine figure in heaven. I've said that several times already, but in 8:17, we find the son of Adam, Ben Adam. It refers to Daniel. So there's some differences here that make this a very unique passage. And there are, I think, at least 3 good reasons to believe that Jesus is referring to Daniel 7:13 in the New Testament. First of all, 60 of his 78 references to the Son of Man also contain other elements of Daniel 7, such as coming on the clouds of heaven. And so he doesn't just use this title, and it's not just, we're not just speculating that he's saying Bar Inasha, but he also has these other elements of Daniel 7, like he's coming on the clouds of heaven. Secondly, the New Testament authors could have rightly translated the Son of Man by saying Ben Adam as, or I'm sorry, they could have translated this as anthropos, but they do not. And then finally, the use of the definite article the. Jesus is not just a Son of Man, but he is the Son of Man. So specifically, the one from Daniel 7:13, he uses the phrase as a title for himself. So let's take a closer look at this high Christology in Daniel 7 that Jesus that really sets Jesus apart as the unique God-man. Number one, the Son of Man comes on the clouds of heaven. Just trying to check and make sure I've got my slides right here. I had to StreamYard, whenever you download a PowerPoint to it, it really messes with what you've put together. And I had to save every PowerPoint slide as a JPEG and then put them back into the PowerPoint so that StreamYard didn't save them. So forgive me if I'm just kind of going back and forth here, making sure I'm on the right slide. But number one, the Son of Man, as I've said, comes on the clouds of heaven. But this was something that only Yahweh did. This is, Jesus says that he's coming on the clouds of heaven. He's referencing Daniel 7 here. But throughout the Old Testament, this was something that only Yahweh did. And there are at least 4 other Old Testament references to Yahweh riding the clouds. If we look at Deuteronomy 33:26, it says, "There is none like the God of Jeshurun, who rides the heavens to your help and through the skies in his majesty." Psalms 68:32-33, we read, "O kingdoms of the earth, sing praises to God, sing praises to the Lord, Selah, to him who rides in the heavens, the ancient heavens." Psalm 10:3-4, "He makes the clouds his chariot. He walks upon the wings of the wind. He makes the wind his messengers, flaming fire his ministers." And then lastly, Isaiah 19:1, here we're told that Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt with them. So here we have 4 Old Testament passages that led the ancient Israelites to believe that anyone who came riding the clouds was a divine figure. The Jews understood this. This was very well understood by them. Bible scholar Peter Gentry says this as well. He agrees, and he says that all we need to demonstrate that the Son of Man is a divine figure, he writes, the coming on clouds suggests an appearance or a theophany of Yahweh himself. If Daniel 7:13 does not refer to an appearance of deity, it is the only exception in about 70 instances in the Old Testament. And this comes from his book, The Son of Man, in Daniel 7, individual or corporate. Perhaps more unusual is how the clouds often represent God. They're personal too. There were, of course, a lot of things that come to my mind as I was trying to prepare this and put it together. But here's just a few verses that I thought of. Exodus 19:16, a thick cloud descends on Mount Sinai and speaks to Moses. Exodus 33:9-10 tells us a pillar of cloud would stand. And notice the language here. A pillar of cloud would stand at the entrance of the tent and speak to Moses. Exodus 33:10-11. The cloud is worshipped as Yahweh, and we're told speaks. Again, notice the language, face to face with Moses. So this is not just any ordinary cloud. If we look, also we see that this one, like the Son of Man, came up to the Ancient of Days. Yet the Bible tells us repeatedly that no man could do this. And here again are just a few verses that I came up with. And Daniel 7:13 contains a simile. The one who approaches the Ancient of Days is like a son of man. I found that very interesting as well. But Exodus 33:20 says that no man can see God and live. In Deuteronomy 4:12, Moses only heard the voice of the Lord. In Exodus 34:29-30, Aaron and the sons of Israel were afraid to approach Moses because his face and skin were illuminated so brightly because of his encounter with God on Mount Sinai. And a New Testament passage that I know that all of you are familiar with is John 1:18, which tells us that no man has seen God at any time. So God, of course, is a spirit. He's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial spirit. So it makes sense that nobody has ever seen God at any time. But of course, John goes on to say that the only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him or exegeted him. What a wonderful passage. I love that. I know Anthony Rogers and others have spoke on this often, but just a neat passage there in John, especially with the Old Testament passages in mind. All right, we also know that only God could be the ultimate judge, yet the Son of Man will judge the nations here in Daniel 7. If we back up just a little bit from verses 13 and 14, verses 9-10, they describe a courtroom where the books were opened. And notice too, if you have your Bibles, that there are thrones, a plurality of thrones, indicating I think that God is multi-personal. I mean, there's not just a throne for the Ancient of Days, but there are thrones, and we know that that Jesus himself is seated at the right hand of the Father right now. So the Son of Man takes on the roles of God in this courtroom scene. You know, it's not just a courtroom scene, but here we have this this divine figure called the Son of Man, who takes on the roles of God in this court. If we think about this and we look at some other passages like Joel 3:2, here we're told that Yahweh will gather the nations and judge them. Again, Daniel 7:13 describes the Son of Man descending to the earth on the clouds of heaven to execute judgment. You can't deny that there are two distinct divine persons here in this passage. And if we go on, also notice that he is given everlasting dominion. When the Son of Man approaches the Ancient of Days, he's given three things: dominion, glory, and a kingdom. And if we look back through the book of Daniel, we see that the word dominion is used frequently to describe the power and authority of God. It's used to describe the power and authority of Yahweh. I mean, it's also used, of course, to speak of the dominion of some men as well. Daniel 4:22 is an example that I have here. It speaks of the rule and authority of Nebuchadnezzar. Speaks of the rule and authority of King Darius in 622, but these are all temporary dominions. These are all limited dominions. Only God has an everlasting dominion, and yet here we find that the Son of Man is given an everlasting dominion in 7:14. But if we look at Daniel 7:27, it says that the dominion and kingdoms will be given to the saints of the Most High, and they will serve and obey him. And if we back up a little bit to 7:14, we see that they're serving the Son of Man here. Oh, I'm sorry. I got a little confused there. So in 7:27, it speaks of the Most High. So it says that dominion and kingdoms will be given to the saints of the Most High. So it's speaking of the Most High. And then if we look at 7:14, it basically says the same thing about the Son of Man. They both will be served, or really the better understanding of this word is worshiped. This is how the word is used elsewhere in Daniel. Daniel 3:12, we're told that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not serve or worship the golden image that was set up. When Nebuchadnezzar threatens to throw them in the fiery furnace, they respond by saying, "Our God, whom we serve," same word here, "is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire," in 3:17. So again, my point is, you can see how the word that's translated as serve here is used synonymously with worship. And again, if we look at some other Old Testament passages like Zechariah 14:9, he says that Yahweh will be king over all the earth. He will be served. Same thing with the title, the Most High. The nations will serve and obey both the Son of Man and the Most High. Again, Daniel frequently refers to God as the Most High, but then he does something very interesting here in chapter 7, verse 25. He refers to the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man with two different terms that both mean Most High. So he refers to the Most High and the highest one. So the final king will speak out against the Most High. This is in verse 25. The final king will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. So you see what he's done here? The Most High and the highest one. These two words are the same. There's no difference between the Most High and the highest one. These are just two different ways of saying the same thing. But by using these two terms, Daniel makes a distinction between the two divine persons, the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. I love that. As I studied this and looked at this passage, what a great place to take our Muslim friends to show them the Father and the Son in the Old Testament. Daniel 7:25. They're both right there. And so I was just looking at the time here. It seems like 30 minutes is all I can go here, but almost done. I'll close with this. If we go back to Matthew 26, I got Matthew 16 there. That should be Matthew 26. There is no Matthew 16:64. Sorry about that typo. But if we go to Matthew 26, where Jesus is standing before Caiaphas, he's in a kangaroo court, so to speak, and he tells the high priest here, he says, "You have said it yourself." This is, verse 64. "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." In other words, I think Jesus is saying here, I am the highest one. I have the power and authority to judge you. And one day you're going to see me coming on the clouds of heaven to execute judgment on you. You think you're judging me right now, but there's going to come a day when I'm going to be judging you. What a powerful passage. We know how the high priest responded. He tore his clothes, accused Jesus of blasphemy. And again, Jesus was using this title, the Son of Man, to explicitly refer to himself as a divine figure from Daniel. And his audience understood that very well. So with that, I'm going to close right there and see if we've got any questions.